Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Windsor, and this is Deb Goodkin. We are going to be talking today about FreeBSD's journey through an audit process, so you've decided to do one, lessons learned about getting funding for it, what happens when you actually do it, all the things that you wish you'd learned beforehand, and the goal is to help anybody else contemplating this process start their own journey and hopefully do it with the benefits of the hindsight and 2020 vision that we have from this point forward. A little bit of background. I work for a project called Alpha Omega. We fund improvements in open source security. Mission statement there pretty much describes what we're trying to do every day. We do it across a huge variety of ecosystems and open source projects. And honestly, every time is a learning journey for us. When we think about the terms alpha and omega, alpha represents points of leverage where we can come in and have impact through a relatively small number of people that then extend to an entire ecosystem. FreeBSD's definitely fits that example. But the other aspect of the problem is that there are hundreds of thousands of small projects out there where there is no single point of leverage, and we are looking at scaled solutions to either both understanding the problem and also how to remediate the problems in a useful way. Deb?
Thank you, Michael. So I'm Deb Goodkin, and I'm the Executive Director of the FreeBSD Foundation. So who here is not familiar with FreeBSD?
All right, we have everybody's familiar.
Everyone is familiar?
Excellent.
Okay.
They're all contributors.
This is awesome. So I'll make this really quick then, that FreeBSD is a complete operating system. It's similar to a Linux distribution, except for it's not Linux. So it did descend from Berkeley Unix, which descended from the original Bell Labs Unix. So it's been around for over 32 years. And it's used everywhere. So most likely you're using FreeBSD now. So if you have like an iPhone, a Mac, and it's a lot of the components that they used in their operating system are from FreeBSD. If you watch Netflix, who doesn't watch Netflix? All the content is being streamed on FreeBSD. Sony PlayStation 2 is FreeBSD based, so it's everywhere. So I do want to share our journey with working with Alpha Omega. So who here works for an organization or maybe maintains a project that needs funding?
Yeah, everybody.
So don't we all?
You're not here for the cookies, you're here for the money. We understand.
Oh, cookies would have been great though. But yeah, so we are the FreeBSD Foundation. Actually, I didn't include that earlier. Just there's a difference between the FreeBSD Foundation and the FreeBSD project. So our whole purpose is to support the project. We are a 501c3, that's US IRS classification, and we're for the public good. And we're actually based here in Colorado. Our headquarters is in Boulder, Colorado, and that's where I'm from. So welcome to my state. So anyway, we support the project in many areas. Security is a key area, and so we wanted funding to support our effort. And we knew that we were critical software for the global digital infrastructure, and we knew we aligned with Alpha Omega. We didn't know much about them, and so that's why I shared this screenshot of their on how to apply from their website. And the thing that really drew me to this page was it felt really welcoming to me. The fact that in the application area there on the left side, that they say if you believe that you align with, with our mission, please request for us to reach out to you. And so they do. They actually connect with you and they guide you through the whole process, which I think is really cool because even though we've been around for a long time, this is a new area for us. We've received grants in the past, but not that many. And so this was sort of outside our comfort zone too, so they really helped us through that process. And yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Like we are very predisposed to organizations that have already taken the first step to saying, I care about security. And it's staggering how often when we start a conversation with some project that we see, this is interesting, we tell them, what are you talking? What do you think about security? And they're like, not yet. That's a nice answer. Like sometimes it's please talk to the hand or other things. And so when an organization has already started their own internal journey, that is like a huge thing for us. We're like, great, we don't have to sell to the problem. We can start talking about the solution. And it makes our conversation a lot better. And then just to build on what you were saying, a lot of grant-making organizations have formal processes and deadlines and calendars and a jury or decision-making process that's opaque, and then you wake up one day and you have 24 hours to update your grant proposal. It is Seth is nodding his head. With us, it's an interactive process. The process is you apply, somebody takes a look at it and says, looks likely, looks not likely, and most of them then fall into the, please meet with Michael. I'm Michael. And then we interactively work together to build the right process so that it's a good outcome for your organization and a good outcome for our goals. And sometimes it ends up being almost exactly the way it started out, and other times we reshape it, rethink it, do a couple of passes, and come up with something that feels like the right first steps. And that, I think, is much like, we're not here to sort of pick winners and losers, we're here to achieve outcomes and work with partners who do that. This is part of that journey.
Well, I think they did pick a winner in this case, but anyway.
Well, I mean, we don't want to make, we're not trying to cause winners and things like that, yeah. But another key point for us is that the journey of funding is one thing. The journey of security, for us, almost always starts with an audit. We learn a lot about your organization, you learn a lot about your organization and your community, about how ready they are to move down that path. An audit tells you a lot. How people respond to the audit process, how they respond to the findings, how they actually deal with the fixes that have to be done, and then what happens next, and the sustained engagement on those problems are all key indicators. And we'll touch on that theme again.
Yeah, so when we wanted to apply, actually we wanted them to fund a security engineer in residence, because we had heard that they do that for other projects. And they came back with, no, we think you should start with an audit. And so that's how that started. Yeah. So a little bit about the timeline so we reached out to them November 2023. And I don't remember when we actually submitted the application, but we received the approval in early February. And I don't know if you've received a grant before, but when you get that email, I mean, you are so excited.
We love that mail.
I mean, you open that email, and so now you know you're going to get the money to do the work that you want to do. But then panic sets in too, because it's like, oh my God, now I'm going to get this money, so we actually have to do this, and we really have to hit the ground running.
And what we're going to talk about next, in the next few slides, is all the things that they had to figure out towards actually turning that grant into the outcomes that we wanted. And it's like, it's very easy to say, we've now got the grant, now what? The now whats are really interesting. And so Deb's going to walk you through these things. So, yeah.
So first we had to scope out what is the definition. So we had like a broad definition of what we wanted to do when we submitted the proposal, and we received a lot of help from Michael in this. But we can't audit FreeBSD. FreeBSD is way too big, and that just wasn't realistic. So we had to target 1 to 2 critical subsystems within FreeBSD, and it had to have current development as well as developers who are actively involved in it. And so we picked Beehive and Capsicum as the 2 subsystems, and the reason why is because they were both critical to the project. They had active development and developers. So Beehive is our hypervisor, and Capsicum is a security framework.
So these are interesting areas from our point of view of like where scaled attacks could start to manifest and really awful things could happen. These are the things you want to have really secure. So it fit very much our model of like, do something that's going to have a durable impact on the security of the whole system. And FreeBSD is famous for its jails and its sort of early approach to containerization and scope limiting for app processes. This is at the root of that. We're very excited about working there.
So yeah, so the other thing too, so when we picked these 2 subsystems, we did make sure we reached out to the committers who maintain those. We don't really have maintainers, but to make sure that they would commit to helping and working with us on this. So we had their full support before we actually decided to go forward with these 2. And then the other thing too is we actually had to put a project plan in place. So that included like timeline and tasks, and really putting a list we had spreadsheets of when tasks would be done, who would be assigned, and all that kind of stuff, and what the outcomes we wanted from this.
And when Deb talks about approaching the maintainers, It sounds obvious, but it turns out it's not. And again, going back to that point I made about, so you want to do an audit and you start saying we're going to do an audit, how those maintainers respond to that conversation might tell you maybe we should pick a different sub-project to work on because they're not ready to handle that conversation. And upfront communicate, no surprises is a really good motto here. So.
Right, and we're not funding these people too. So, I mean, some we are, but we need to have people who are actually
You're creating work for them, yeah.
So where do you start? So you have to pick your security vendor, and how do you even know where to look? And so there are a couple of things that we were looking for. One was we wanted a company that was experienced with FreeBSD, and we also wanted to look at cost because we didn't want all the money that we were getting from Alpha Mega just to go to the auditor, and they're not cheap. So we did identify 3 security companies out there that had submitted vulnerabilities in the past. And so we evaluated their work and their experience, and then we approached 2 and talked to them, got proposals and quotes, and then we selected one from that. So then you need people to actually do the work. And so you need the auditor, we had a security engineer. We actually had someone on staff and we changed their role. They're working in a different area, but they had a security background. And in fact, he was a security auditor at one time, which was really cool. He could see it from both sides. We had a technical writer, or we had to bring someone on to do this because they require, for accountability, that Alpha Mega required weekly reports, monthly reports, maybe quarterly reports, I can't remember.
Monthly updates, think of it as sort of tell us what inputs went in, what work you did. Quarterly updates, tell us what happened, what was the outcome, and so forth. That's our current model. Back then it was just monthly and then an end of project report.
Yeah, I think internally we have weekly reports because we just do that in general. And a final report too that we submitted to Alpha Omega, as well as documenting like our learnings and how to do things going forward. So when we ended the project, then someone else could take that documentation.
And just that act of reporting, our asking for the report, to be blunt, we almost don't read them very deeply. It's the act of producing them, and then they share it internally, and it becomes an incredibly valuable tool. And we do look at them, but the fact that they produce them and that their community has access to them is key. And part of it is because most of the people in your organization working on your project have never actually had to deal with security. Or when they have, it's been in a narrow context of the thing they're working on, a feature, where they're just plugging tab A into slot B or something like that. And then recognizing that they are now dealing with threat models and external entities and things like that is a whole new journey. Expecting them to be good at that from day one and for everybody to think it's normal would be a mistake, right? And so their process of normalizing a security culture by having roles that work about it, but also that point about bringing auditors and special people here is because they have experience. They've done this before. They have playbooks and understandings of how one does security analysis of the code, how one talks about it, how one does. You don't know these things yet, and you're going to learn them, and it's going to be, this is the journey.
It is a journey.
Yeah.
When another role was project manager. So we had a few other major projects before, and we never had a project manager. And this was key to overseeing this whole project and ensuring that everyone knew what they're supposed to do. And I mean, you know what project management is. And so that was just such a key role. And then the experts in the different areas that we could work with. And then storytellers, our marketing. We like to call it storytelling now, because really we're sharing the story of what we're doing, and also we want to show value to Alpha Mega of their investment.
One of our first rules is make us want to do it again. And I say that all the time, but at the end of the day, funding is very much a hand-to-mouth kind of thing each time. Making us want to do it again is really important. But also, FreeBSD is a point of leverage. There's a lot of organizations downstream from FreeBSD who use it. Deb cited them. You want to have them understand that the value they're getting out of this and wanting them to appreciate the value and to care about it and to care about sustaining it long term. So the storytelling part of this is really, it's much more important than it would seem on the surface.
Yeah, and we actually just hired a technical marketing engineer, and so he wasn't involved with us, and And I got storytelling from him because as engineers, so my background is engineering, and I know how engineers typically feel about marketing, and so he recrafted it, and this didn't really come from him, but really marketing people are just, I mean, everyone here is a marketing person because we're all storytellers, and so even the person in their basement writing some code, if they're talking to their buddy about the code, they're a storyteller. So I just had to share that. The audit findings. And so we did the audit, and so it was this tsunami of vulnerabilities. I mean, you think of just like all these vulnerabilities coming in a short period of time. And so you have all of them coming in, but still you have the structure in place of normal, the normal cadence of vulnerabilities. And so you have to deal with those inbound ones and how you're going to handle it. And so our security team did have a process, but it wasn't perfect for this case, and that's how we learned. And so we found that the auditors were finding problems faster than we could fix them.
And I think that you look at the audit and say it's going to go find all the problems in our code, right? Well, you're going to have to fix those problems. And that's typically 10 times more work than finding them. And I think that one of the points that you made when our those conversations, right, is that the auditors are also not necessarily the best people to estimate the consequences of their findings. And so going back to those SME roles and like that, people in that role who can, as the vulnerability report comes in, and they don't come in all at once, they come in fast and furious, but like one at a time, having someone who can then evaluate this in terms of the risk with the context of the project they're working on, and also, well, what's it going to take to fix this? Because you're going to have to start putting into your project plan, how are we going to dig our way out of this now piles of 0 days sitting in our universe hole that we are now responsible for? And honestly, that's where your project management team and the security people and everybody came together really well on that. It was pretty awesome to watch.
But this also highlights how you really want these processes in place before you start. So you want a vulnerability management process before you begin this project. And so we did have a mature process in place, and so going through this whole project, so we had the security engineer, and he worked directly with the auditor, and so they met weekly. He also worked closely with our security team. And one advantage we have is that we do have some of the security engineers or team members on our staff. And so they were fully involved. And so that really helped. And then also the encrypted reports went to the security engineer. So it's just to one person. And that way, so he can oversee everything and doesn't get lost by having multiple people. But you also have the project manager overseeing the whole thing. And then, it was just really took a coordinated effort between all these different teams and people in different roles.
To be beating on this drum again, right? When you bring in an auditor, you have a foundation running the show at some level, and you have these communities of developers working on things and other stakeholders and like that, right? Those are organizational boundaries. Comms do not flow naturally across organizational boundaries. Scheduling and priority does not flow naturally across those organizational boundaries. And so in this case, Alice was the project manager. The work that she did was to make sure that the communication structures, the meeting structures, the right people were in the right place at the right time, because it is very easy for things across, and again, I say organizational boundaries, create chasms of information flow and confusion. And so without that continuous monitoring of that process, you'll wake up at the end of the audit and have a whole bunch of really pissed off, surprised, confused people. Not that we've seen that happen ever before, right, Derek?
So one thing we learned is that you find vulnerabilities where you look. And so the auditors found 28, and it was a 6-week window that they were doing the audit.
And like, it sounds obvious, right? Like, but your flow, the business that you had before, all the vulnerabilities, they sort of crop up when people find them and where they're looking. And now you've focused your attention on Beehive and Kappa Scum. And guess what? You're going to find vulnerabilities there, right? And you're not going to find them elsewhere. So it doesn't mean everything else is fixed because we had an audit this week. It's like where you put your attention is where you're going to find vulnerability. It sounds obvious, but when you walk through the repercussions in terms of your organizational dynamic, the flows, things like that, recognizing that you're bringing out a magnifying glass, you're putting it one area at a time, and it's going to create a little bit of a burning sensation when you do that.
So we normally use Bugzilla for the bug reports and for tracking them. And for this project, we actually created an internal tracking system, and just to help us keep on top of all the bug reports that were coming in. And so it allowed us to work closely between our security engineer, the SMEs, and our security team. And it was really important to time disclosing these vulnerabilities, as you know, that you want to make sure that you have a workaround or solution before you actually publicly disclose this information.
So this is where open source becomes a little less open, right? Vulnerability management, vulnerabilities are not normal bugs. And we've seen all kinds of interesting patterns, including some organizations where the engineers don't want to call it a CV, they don't call it a vulnerability because that looks somehow bad. So they'll just file a normal ticket in their bug tracking system, which everybody in the world can trawl through and see, right? And so they could not put these vulnerability reports in their normal bug tracking system. They had to invent a new process because they didn't have one before. Pro tip, have a process for vulnerabilities. They are a different class of issue, and they need a different class of access and handling than the normal bugs, right? It sounds obvious, but when you're sitting there in the trenches, suddenly with an audit coming down the door, it's not obvious, and you're scrambling to set up the process. Now, they did an amazing job, but it's just not normal, and working that through is important.
Especially having so many come in at once.
And then, the engineering teams then had to have their own engineering plan for how we're going to get this fixed, how we're going to get it out, who gets to be disclosed. Again, that's part of that process of who should know this, right? And so that sort of strict need to know sort of fake police tape I put in front of the very quiet welding process that's happening here, it's complicated.
Yes. They weren't 0 days.
The question was 28, did we find 28 0 days as part of the audit? And,
thank you, yeah. No, it was, so there are different severities.
Okay. The full report is online, post facto now. And at the end of this deck, we have a QR code to this deck, and I will put a link, I'll post facto update the slide deck to include a link to the actual report as well. It's good reading, it's long, yeah.
So we found a lot of vulnerabilities in a short period of time, and it's sort of felt like that ice bucket challenge. I don't know if you remember that. It was pretty recent, but it's in public. It's shocking. Sometimes you just want to scream. And so that's how it felt with having all of them, because we weren't used to that. And so one vulnerability that was found was sort of interesting, because some passionate FreeBSD hackers wanted to bypass some of the controls of the Sony PlayStation. They found a vulnerability that allowed them to do that. And so we also found that in the audit, and because of the public disclosure, Sony actually was able to go in and fix that issue. So,
one man's jailbreak is another man's vulnerability, right? It's freeing up the PlayStation for us to do what we want to as open source advocates, great. Allowing attacks on your personal information data via the Sony PlayStation Network, not so good, right? So these are the tensions at work here.
Yeah, and it just shows too that they're not all brand new. Some of them have been around. I don't know how long they had been around. But also communication to our downstream users is really important.
So pause on that.
Okay.
Do you know who your downstream users are? Most open source projects do not, right? When you are distributed as a giant binary that people install, like an application or an operating system, right? It's a little easier to know, but not obvious, right? This is honestly a failing of most open source projects we encounter. In both directions, they don't have a meaningful relationship upstream with their dependencies or downstream with their dependents. And so when things like this happen, who you're going to call is either tell the world and whoopsie, or YOLO, right? These are not good patterns. And so any open source project should understand and think about who are your downstream dependents, who use you, what are the big ones that matter, where would you want to have a relationship, which, by the way, since we're talking about funding, it's an important thing too, like having them understand the import of your work and that they can then prioritize their funding resources towards things that really matter, and talking about the impact of your work in terms that matter to them. It's just good business.
Yeah, I mean, that is so important, because I know with us, since we have the BSD license, that which is great. It's a permissive license, and there's a lot of organizations out there that use FreeBSD that we don't know about. They don't need to tell us. They don't need any help. And so it's really important, and we want to know, because I mean, we want to understand use cases too, but we also want to build the relationships. And so we try to encourage users out there to be a lighthouse for us, for the project, and to let others know that they're using it, but also let us in the community know, because we can help facilitate collaboration too for them. And we're a dependency for them, so that's really important. So the project is done, and we feel like it was successful. We learned a lot, and so we did write a report, and we wanted to really show in the report that we actually include the report from the auditor. We included our lessons and our learnings, what we did, but we also want to show Alpha Omega that this was a good investment. And so we wanted to include that into the report, why this was a good investment for you. And I mean, there were many lessons learned. A lot of them we incorporated, but it also takes time. And so now that the project has completed, then that means the funding for that work has stopped. And so we try to incorporate as much as we can, but it's a slower process as we go forward. But one thing that we gain as a foundation is that we have a lot more confidence in taking on large-scale projects. So we actually have like 3 major ones in flight right now. So it's key for our team.
And for us, that kind of catalytic effect, right? We spend some money and cause them to become better at doing this and more able to do these things in a broader way. This image here is meant to convey, by the way, that you're going to do all this hard work, you're going to know all the project management, all the things figured out. You're going to come to the end of it, you'll have patched all the bugs, done the report, and there's still this feeling of the parade just ended and there's a lot of trash on the floor, and one of the things they talked about was there's a backlog of work that didn't get done while this was getting done. And that created a whole knock-on effects and so forth. So the project planning actually has to have a macro perspective around the other things that are in flight and how we're going to allocate resources and what's going to get picked up and so forth, especially if the funding happened because Alpha Omega showed up one day and said, we want to fund you, right? And that'll happen in other contexts as well. And we want to do it now. We don't want to wait till the end of your project cycles or other things like that. So you're now going to have some rejiggering and juggling of schedules. So good to think about. Should I move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we learned a lot of lessons from this project. And so I'll start with communication and how important that is. And there's so many different stakeholders involved in this. So you have the auditing organization, the security team, project maintainers, the sponsor, the broader community, and that's anyone using or contributing to FreeBSD, and then our marketing, so getting our story out there and telling the world that not only are we more secure, but we believe strongly that this helps the open source ecosystem in general. So then you have the process and our processes. And so first so we did apply for another grant for another project. And so we really learned that we need to have, they refer to as a shovel-ready project. And that means everything is ready. You actually have the people that you know are going to take on this project. So have that in place. Spend the time in the front end of crafting your application. It's a lot more efficient too, and that's what they really are looking for.
And we are very biased on shovel readiness. Like, we are not going to transfer funds from our fund to your fund so that you can then figure out next year how you're going to get something done. I need to be able to talk about my results as an organization, quarter by quarter, cycle by cycle, grant by grant impact. That's how, because the money's not coming from my back pocket, that's for sure. Right? There are Microsoft, Amazon, and Google and Citi are generously donating the money, and they're on the same OpEx cycle as everybody else is. And so making sure that that machine is flowing well is super important, of like just the work, when we come to do work, we want it to start quickly, we want you to be ready to do it. And yeah, there's an onus on you, there's a burden on you to have that stuff lined up before the check clears, but part of that interactive process is one where we are able to right-size all the things and line them up in the way.
So it really made us think too, like what, because we know we have so much work to do. And so and we knew that they were interested in funding more work, but really what is it that would be impactful to us and to Alpha Omega and to open source in general.
There's one thing I want to add, I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
We also are very much, we're a very reasonable donor, and that we don't want to have you pad the budget in case the deliverables don't line up well because its software gets in badly, or stress crazy about doing something that turns out to be the wrong idea or impractical or whatever. And so one of the things that we'd had as part of the grant was getting MFA enabled for contributors into their environment. And it turns out there were a lot of reasons why that was more complicated than we thought. So okay, let's not try that. We'll back away from it. We'll do some investigation, come back to it. And for us, that's a value in terms of not having sort of everybody gamifying how much they ask for, how much they do, and things like that, because software projects across organizational boundaries are hard, but one where it's a collaboration towards a shared set of outcomes. So it's a big difference for us. Should I go to the next one?
No.
No, you got more. Sorry.
So as far as the process, that makes sure that you have process in place to handle the audit and the vulnerabilities that come in. And then the other thing that we ended up doing was classifying, or we created classes of errors, and so we could sort of put them in buckets to help us going forward with looking across FreeBSD, to help us also do our own audits. And then just really creating a security mindset across the whole project. So that's not just in software development. You think of it in your build infrastructure, tooling, your coding standards, and even your communication process. Because FreeBSD has been around for a very long time, and there's a lot of different ages, I'm trying to think how to say it. But using different types of tools, and they don't all integrate. And so just be aware of that. And then the people. And you need people in order to do this. And so understanding the resources you need, and then where do you find them? And are they available? And then also, can you afford them? And having the experts available and available on demand as much as they can, but they're ready to step in if you do find something critical. And then we just shared pictures of, these are some of the people that were involved in the project, and then the list of names are actually the folks who were mostly SMEs on the project. So we had a big team of people who are working really well together.
And from our perspective, these aren't roles and numbers or assigned people. I'm friends with these people now. And they're part of our broader community, and there's plenty of people in the room here who've met them in various Alpha Omega meetings as well, right? And that's meaningful, right? And I say this every one of my talks, right? At the end of the day, open source is always about personal relationships and trust with people doing the right thing, right? And these are people that worked with us, did great work, and now part of our extended community, and have abilities that we can trust to count on. And so if Ed comes back to me next time and says, I've got this great idea, I want to do something like that, I already know Ed has done the right things in a variety of contexts. The conversation goes much faster. The SOW turns into a few bullets as opposed to a contract, right? That's how this game works, right? At the end of the day, security is always about trust across real humans, specific people, not people in general, right? So.
And actually, Michael came to our BSD conference that was just in Ottawa, Canada, a few weeks ago, and gave a talk, but also met some of these people in person, and it shed a light on a lot of things that we were doing, asked some great questions during some of the talks. And so he's part of the community now, too.
And then some of those folks came and joined us at some Alpha Omega conversations we had yesterday as well. It keeps connecting, right? And that's how it works.
Yeah, actually, that's really cool. So one guy who's sitting in the audience, and Michael said that he's going to be at Denver for these panels and roundtables yesterday, and Warner, who is in the audience, was like, Denver? I live in Denver. And he's the perfect person, too, to attend.
And it was great.
So he came yesterday, and now he wants to be involved. Which is
It's a
awesome.
trap.
I have heard that before. So really the outcome is culture, a change of culture. We've had a security culture. Security has always been one of our top priorities within FreeBSD, but thinking of it more as a culture and a mindset that's one thing that we gained from this project. It also fit in Alpha Omega's mission too. And I feel like that we've instilled the security mindset with and that's what we'll also try as we go forward, to continue to instill this mindset as we go forward in all these different areas of the project. And we'll just have to continue improving and nurturing this and what we've learned and build on top of that too.
And what culture creates is an organizational, institutional ability to handle a new thing in the ways that are consistent with what you're trying to do. So the next security situation that happens in FreeBSD, it's not just there's a document with a process, there's a community of people who know the right thing to do. They don't have to go off and read, what should we do here? Read paragraph 27. No, it's like, this is how we are. And the expectations, the normalization of those things become part of the culture. Somewhat delightfully coincidentally, the previous talk was about community development and management, of reaching down in the organization and drawing people up and having engagement models there too. And so that's all part of it, right? At the end of the day, it's like starting with the set of people we saw on the previous slide, starting with Deb and Alice and Greg kind of initiating the conversation. There's now a community of people inside FreeBSD who have embraced and embodied a culture of security as a priority within the organization, as a process. And that is Alpha Omega's goal, right? That's what we want. We want to step back and say, even if we can't fund anything else, and we promise we're going to fund more, right?
Hope so.
You are on that journey, and things will just keep getting better. So that's really important.
So finally, would we audit again? I have to say, heck yeah. So, I mean, we saw the value of audits, and we do want to do more audits. And so we're already looking at what components and subsystems we do want to audit. We will ask for funding. We're actually now approaching companies to help fund those efforts because we know it's important to them too. And just the fact that we learned that you find vulnerabilities where you look. So that's another reason why we want to do that. But we do feel in the end that our processes have improved, that our code is more secure. And we've actually improved the communication, not only within our project and the sponsor, but also with our community too, to bring and welcome them into this work that we're doing. So we feel like in the end that the project as a whole has a bigger security mindset and culture that's just ingrained now.
And for us, that's perfect, right? They started the journey. They want to do more of it. There's a culture of growing. We allocate a significant portion of our budget towards audits because we've just learned over and over again, this is how it works out, right? And if you're approaching Alpha Omega for a security-related conversation, right, start with the audit. Think about the audit you'd like to have, and we're going to have a great, quick conversation. I can turn money around on audits very quickly. Other things are more complicated. Staffing roles, we treat them seriously. They take years, and so we don't want to have them drop out because we can't get funding next year. Audits have clear beginning, middle, and end, and yes, there's the parade cleanup afterwards, but it's still a very easy thing for us to fund and produces such amazing outcomes that we want to do more of it. And so with that, I want to thank you, take questions. We're here for a few minutes, and we can certainly step outside and take more questions
definitely.
here. And as promised, here's the QR code to the deck. We'll start taking questions right away. I see Andrew up front. There's a mic coming your way.
Oh.
Great, we'll get it on the...
You mentioned, the report that you made and then gave back to Alpha Omega. Did you also share that report with other people and companies that you were looking for funding for in the future? Was it reusable as a kind of...
Look, we did this.
Yeah, definitely, we didn't... We made it public, so we put it on our website, and we did write a blog about that, and we shared it with Alpha Omega. I think they also included part of it in their annual report. But it's an interesting question as far as we didn't go directly to commercial users and say, here, look at what we did. But it is something that we would use when we do our next audit, since we will be looking for funding.
I think it's a great question, like coming to a funder with saying, look, here's what happened with our last funding. Like, speaking as someone who does the funding, one of the first things we think about is this going to work out? right? Are they competent to handle this, right? And there's a full range of competencies. And we have to optimize for things where it's going to play out well. This is proof that it's going to play out well. And so in many ways, funding is no different than venture capital. You're making bets on creating future outcomes. We don't get the returns in terms of money back. We get the returns in terms of ecosystems that are more secure and sustainably so. But we want to have that. And so when someone comes saying, I want more money, right? If we've done an audit with them, we're already predisposed, right? If they come having done an audit somewhere else and said, look at this one, we can do more of these, and look, we know how to do audits, we're like, oh, these aren't going to screw around, they're not going to waste a bunch of time figuring things out, they're going to get it done. That's very powerful. Any other questions?
I think this is the last one we could take, and then we can go outside too.
So I'm curious, thank you for the great presentation. I'm curious about what to expect from that audit. Like how much of that triage and severity, vulnerability aspects do you have to do sort of in-house versus what comes out directly from the audit?
Well, we had to do everything in-house.
So that audit's not going to say like, these are the things you really need to focus on.
Well, they do try to prioritize things, but also they're not FreeBSD experts. And so we internally look at them and look at what the severity is of them. And so sometimes they may say, or you even may look at something and go, oh, this would be quick to fix, and it's much more complex. So they basically come out with the report. The report is in our report, so we're totally transparent with their findings, and we've taken that on ourselves to deal with them. Is that what you're asking? Or?
I would encourage you, don't treat it as a lump that shows up that you can then go off and do all this stuff. Like the incremental process, like the report was done at the end of the thing, but there was an ongoing stream of reports coming in, and you essentially have to treat it as a streaming process, and you want your people engaged. Otherwise, honestly, there's a very good chance that this giant lump will show up, and everyone will run away from it as fast as humanly possible, and now you have a pile of not disclosed zero-day vulnerabilities sitting on your lap. Think of them as toxic waste, and a bunch of people running out of the way because it's now insurmountably huge. There's no process for this. I have these other deadlines. What am I supposed to do? And it's just going to create unbelievable tension everywhere. So the streaming that they did effectively is exactly the way you should do it, right? So if the audit is external and comes in like a lump, this happens too. Some companies will pay for an audit because they're worried about something they're using, and then they'll show up on your door with a pile of vulnerabilities or an audit report at the end saying, good luck, right? That's not good either. You want to be engaged every step of the way. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll be around outside if you want more conversations.
Yeah.